Now that we have the ability to log in and log out users, let's look at how users can interact with their passwords. We're going to start by looking at how we can allow authenticated users to change their existing password in the event that they want to secure it, change their password, whatever it is. So let's start in the browser, and you can see that I have come to password change. I'm currently looking at the page that we will be developing. I just want us all to be very clear about what is going to be happening. So I'm going to enter what I believe is my current password, and what hopefully is a password that Django will accept. And I'm going to say change password, and you can see I'm going to say nope, don't save that, and I get a message just as we have with login and logout that says yep, password has been changed successfully. Now this is the behavior that we are going to want in the long run. It's not what we're going to get completed in this lesson, but let's keep this in mind as we move forward. So as with everything that we're doing, we always start with tests. This is one of the places where people will argue about whether you need to write tests because this is behavior that is provided by Django. Are we writing tests for a library that we don't fully control? Is a question and a debate that I see people get into. However, my opinion is that because I have to guarantee that this behavior works for my users, I want to ensure that upon any Django update, any sort of change that happens throughout my system, that I still allow my own users to change their passwords. So I think that it is worth having at least some minimal integration tests for this website with Django, which we are relying on. So I'm going to come down, and you can see that we're pulling in the test case from Django Test Plus, and that we are using the user factory provided by Improved User again. You can also see that I'm relying on setup test data again to simply create a password. I note that this is more a demonstration of setup test data. Much in the way that we're saying user factory here, we could simply say, yep, password is secure password up here as instance variables, and it would be about the same. Now, meanwhile, unlike with the previous tests that we had seen, I don't want a single user for each and every single one of the instances. I want a different user for each test. And that's because we're going to be modifying the user in all of our tests. You know, when you use setup test data, this is data that is going to be for all of your tests. And when you use setup, this is going to be just for each and every one of them. So that's the key difference there. Now, I'm then going to say, well, I would like to see what happens if I am anonymous and try and access test password change. So you can see I'm going in and using reverse, which we'd imported all the way to the top, and looking for password change. And I'm saying, well, I expect that we are going to also need the login URL. Now, in the event that I try and access this page, regardless of whether I'm using get or post, I expect that I'm going to be redirected. So that's what's happening here is I'm saying, yep, for any anonymous user that tries to access the password change URL, regardless of whether it's get or post, right, this request, I want to ensure that we redirect to the login page. So that's our first one. Now, that means that for everything else, we sort of anticipate that we're going to be logged in. And so just as before, we've gone ahead, and when we look at changing a password and just looking at what templates we get, we use the user that we create in setup to then go ahead and log in. So nothing new or particularly exciting so far. You can see these are pretty quick, pretty terse. Now finally we get to one of the more interesting ones, which is we're going to post data. We're going to post the existing password, and then we're going to post the new password twice, because we expect that there are two password fields in the password form. And I'm just setting as a variable to make comparison easier. And then we go ahead and we say, oh, well, we expect that we are going to be redirected to password change done once this password has been done. Now you'll note that this deviates from the behavior that we have just seen. When we went ahead and changed our password, we were actually redirected to an account, and we got a nice little signal. That's not Django's default behavior. Django by default wants to redirect you to a page called password change done. And so for the moment, because we're just going to be getting started, we're going to look and follow the way Django does this by default. So we then go ahead back in our code here, back in our test. We're going to log in with the user. with the password that is the existing password. We then post to the password change with the data, with the expectation that this is now going to change our password. And we say, yep, we expect that this is going to redirect to the password change done URL to confirm that this works. We then refresh our user and we check the password with the new password. We're trying to make sure that the password is changed, right? And in the event that this is not true, we provide a message that says, hey, the user's password didn't change, something has gone wrong. So that's the change post. Now, of course, if we are going to be redirecting to change done, we really should have some information about that page. And so this is more or less exactly what we'd previously done. We simply say, yep, I want to make sure that I can access this in the event that I'm not logged in. I just want to make sure that I get redirected to login. Nothing particularly special. And then if we are logged in, we simply say, yep, if we are logged in with the user, with the password, and we know that when this test is run, it is always going to be the initial password because we recreate the user for each one of these tests, we then simply go, yeah, if we access it, we expect that the following templates are going to be used to display this. So that is all the behavior that we expect to have out of the gates once we begin to use the views as provided by Django. Now, we have already pulled in the URL paths provided by Django for this, and so we already have access to these views. So if we run these tests, we expect that we might see some template errors, but most of this should work. So as with anything in TDD, let's just jump right in and run the tests. So back in my terminal, I've gone ahead and typed out our test command, and for the moment I'm just going to limit it to user because that is where these tests were written, and then run it in Docker. You can see that there are a few things that have happened. So we expected all of the registration base, but you can see that some places are not redirecting as we might expect. That is sort of a bit of a surprise. Now, as there was a setting previously that helped us deal with automatic redirections within our auth views, there is yet another setting. So now we're setting the login URL, and what we're saying is in the event that we detect that a view requires authentication, right? So if we show up at a view and the view expects that the user is going to be authenticated and we're not authenticated, that view is going to try and redirect that user to the login URL. But if it doesn't know what the login URL is, it can't possibly redirect our user. So this is what where those various views are going to pull that URL name from. So they will refer to the setting and they will say, oh, well, I was expecting an authenticated user. I have an anonymous user. I don't know who this is. I need to redirect them to the login page. Where is the login page? Let me ask settings and look at the login URL settings. Lo and behold, it will say, I need to redirect to the URL path named auth login. Let's go ahead and do that. So that should fix some of the errors that we're seeing, but of course, we can always come back and we can simply run our tests to make sure that that has had an effect. And you can see we have completely removed all of the various redirection errors with maybe one exception here. Let's ignore that exception for the moment and let's go ahead and deal with the various templates. You can see that the various pages are also relying on admin, so we are running into a template namespace conflict error, but that isn't going to matter because we have all of our templates in the template directory, which is in the project root as specified in our config settings base. Now, just moving into the future, you can see that what I've gone ahead and done is created two new templates, password change done and password change form. And just real quick, you can see that there's no real magic here. We are simply extending our registration base. We then have a form which will post with submit when we change the password, and we are simply printing out whatever form the Django view is giving to us, always remembering to include this CSRF token. Similarly, for our password change done, it's just a nice little note that, your password has been changed. And we will even be given a title for this page, which we can display. So that will be that. Now, there's a bit of a hiccup here that you may not have anticipated. So I'm going to go ahead and move into the root directory and run docker compose up. You'll note if I run the tests while I wait for Docker to get started, if I run the tests, we are having this weird assert redirect. It says, well, you know, it didn't redirect as expected. Response code was 404. But that's fairly strange, you know, change post. We know that all of the views that we expect to work are currently working. So why are we seeing a 404 instead of a 302? Now, this is one of those weird ones where we say the response code was 404, expected 302. You know what? Sometimes it's worth just jumping into the browser and seeing exactly what is going on. So that's why I've started up Docker Composer and it looks like it's all running. I'm going to shift over to the browser here. Now, we don't have links. Let me just make sure. So I am logged in. We don't have the various pages that we'd previously seen, but I am just going to access the password. Nope, that's not what I want. I want the password change view. So here I am, and I've immediately forgotten my password. This is what you get when you change your password a whole bunch of times, and you aren't writing it down. Let's find out. Oh, so the change password worked, but you'll notice that it's looking for password change done. What's happening here is that the Django change password view is trying to redirect to a URL path by the name of password change done. Because we're using the auth namespace, that URL path does not exist, right? Instead, we have auth : password change done. So if we wanted to properly redirect, we would have to go ahead and pass in the actual success URL to password change so that it knows to redirect to auth password change done. Now, that means that we're no longer going to be including the Django auth URLs. We have to import all of the different views and then refer to each one in our own URL configuration. The other option would be simply to remove the auth namespace, and that would work fine. However, as we'll see in the upcoming videos, there are lots of other reasons that we would want to take control of those views and to control those URLs ourselves, so that is going to be what we do in the next couple of lessons.